Hello, this is the second of 3 interviews that I recorded for my documentary The Making of Monkey Island, and if you haven't watched that yet then I recommend doing so before you listen to this. This one is with Dave Grossman, whose first real project was in fact The Secret of Monkey Island, and he went on to co-create one of my other all-time favourite games, Day of the Tentacle. After Lucasfilm he worked for Ron Gilbert's company Humongous Entertainment, and from 2005 to 2014 at Telltale Games. You can find Dave on Twitter at Phronopolis or at phronopolis.com. Links for both are in the video description. As with Ron's interview, this one is audio only. I've edited out some of the pleasantries at the start, so we'll just jump right into the questions. Hope you all enjoy it. Okay, so I guess starting at the start, from your perspective at LucasArts, how did you actually come to work at LucasArts? I think it was it 1989 you started there?
It was. Yeah, I was a computer science kid. I had studied CS at Berkeley, and I was going to grad school in San Diego studying artificial intelligence. And I soured on the whole sort of academia experience. My original plan was to just never leave school. I was going to stay there and become a professor. And grad school kind of taught me what that looked like, and I decided I didn't really want that. So I decided I would learn stuff in real life instead, and I was just looking around for a computer science job of some sort. I wanted to hopefully do something a little bit fun, and I didn't really want to work at a bank, and I didn't want to do something nefarious like missile guidance systems or something like that. I wanted to do good in the world. So I went back up to Berkeley, and they had a job center there, and it was all these folders full of actual pieces of paper. It was how you did that in those days. I was leafing through them, and there was a job opening at this place called Lucasfilm, which I was vaguely familiar with. They'd made these Star Wars movies. I'd seen a couple of them. They were pretty good. And they needed people to come make computer games with them, and I was like, that sounds cool. It never occurred to me that was a thing you could do for a living. Like I had played some computer games, and I had even made a couple of real simple ones as a teenager. But it didn't seem like the kind of a job that existed in the real world, and so I was curious about that, and I sent in my resume, and for some reason they decided to interview me. David Fox later told me it was because I had listed apple juice as an interest. I just thought that was weird, and figured he had to talk to me, I guess. And the weird thing is I kind of bombed that interview. Like I went out to Skywalker Ranch, which is along this winding road in the hills about an hour from where my apartment was, and it was kind of first thing in the morning, so I was half asleep, and I was just kind of having a little trouble keeping it together. And across from me at this table were Gilbert was there, Gary Winnick was there, David Fox was there, a whole bunch of these guys, and sort of like a panel interrogation kind of thing. Very scary. And sort of midway through the interview, or what felt like midway through the interview, Ron put his pencil down, and I've later learned that that's kind of a sign, like putting your pencil down on a piece of paper is sort of like, all right, I'm done. I don't want to know anymore. And he said, "Well, I got things to do. See ya." And he left the room, and one by one, all the rest of them were like, "Yeah, we gotta go." And they all took off and was like, I have totally blown this. I missed this job. So on the way out, David was the one who had brought me in, and I was sort of talking to him. I was like, "Look, I don't think that went very well, but I'm really excited about this, and I totally want this job. I'm better in the afternoon, trust me. Get a little coffee in me, then I'll do a better job." And he was like, "All right." And then I didn't hear anything for like weeks, until finally I just moved on. I figured I gotta go find some other job. And then they called me one day, like 3 weeks later, and were like, "Could you come in for another interview with the VP in charge of the division?" And I'm like, "Oh." I didn't realize at the time that was basically just a rubber stamp. They were already going to hire me. So I don't know what it was. Maybe David just liked me or something. But for some reason, they decided to hire me on, and the rest is history, I guess.
So you said there that you'd played a couple of games. Did you play any adventure games before this?
I had, yeah. I mean, I played the adventure game, Colossal Cave Adventure, or as it was called then, just Adventure. It was known in a lot of circles. This was my mother was a computer programmer, and she was working at Burroughs, which I think is where the mainframe was that I was playing this game on. She would bring home this. It was remote working, even back then. A dial-up terminal that she could phone into the mainframe there, and it was this enormous, like 50-pound device, like a huge electronic typewriter with these great big suction cups on the back that you plugged your phone into, and it had like a 2400 baud modem built into it. It made the terrible sounds and everything. And I spent hours and hours on that thing, wasting the rolls of thermal paper that it used, expensive thermal paper, playing this adventure game, and just X, Y, Z, Z, Y, and there was a small mailbox here, just the classic one. So that was my first exposure to adventure games, and I hadn't played another adventure game until the job offer came up, and I was like, oh, I got to bone up for this interview. So I played Leisure Suit Larry on my roommate's computer at that point. Yeah. And those were the two that I had done before my interview. Now, there were some other computer games that I had played. Code of Hammurabi was around when I was 13 or so, and Hunt the Wumpus was a game you could find. And that was the one that I actually wrote my own version of. I don't know if are you familiar with Hunt the Wumpus?
No.
It's a classic sort of text-only game, and you're in a little maze of caves numbered from 1 to 20, and they're connected to each other by passages. And you're hunting this Wumpus creature, and there are other hazards in the caves. There's some bottomless pits, so you don't want to go into a cave that has a bottomless pit in it, or you fall into it and you die. And there's some bats that can attack you and stuff. And you have these arrows that you can shoot into the next cave from where you are. And so you're supposed to try and explore around, and by the clues that it gives you about what you can smell or feel, determine where the Wumpus is and shoot him with one of your arrows. And so I made a different version of it which had some alternate maps in it, and which allowed you to attack the Wumpus with your bare hands if you ran out of arrows. You had a tiny chance of success. And this was, I wrote it in APL, which is a computer language back then, very highly symbolic and almost completely illegible to humans. But it meant you could write a program like that in a very tiny amount of space. So that's my first big programming task in my first game.
So which projects did you actually work on before Monkey Island, and what was your role on those?
Well, Monkey Island was really the first one. However, when we got there, they weren't quite ready to have us work on stuff. They weren't quite ready to teach us to use the system. Like, the idea was this was kind of an apprenticeship, kind of a job. So there were 4 of us, and they packed us in an office, and they were going to teach us to use the SCUM system, and then have us work on games with that. Great, cheap labor. So before they were just busy with something else. I can't train you guys just yet, but we've got this game that needs testing. I think the first one was these little arcade games. Tim remembers. We don't. We tested the arcade style games for like 2 days, and then they put us on the one that I do remember, which was the Battle of Britain. Larry and his crew were making this flight sim, and I am the world's worst flight simulator pilot. So the four of us were in this office together. We were all testing the Battle of Britain for several weeks, and I was the one who called in and reported the bugs to the Battle of Britain team who were off site, and there were all these kind of normal bugs, and then there were my bugs, which were always like, if you crash on takeoff 10 times in a row, this happens. Or if you fly straight up in the air and then plunge directly down towards the ground, this graphical glitch happens. It's just always about being a terrible, terrible pilot. Those are valid bugs. And then after that, they put us through some training where they handed us some art from Sam and Max. It was like their office and the hallway outside their office and little animations of the two of them. And we're just kind of like, here are the tools you use to put this together, and they would teach us a little more each day. Go. And so that was fun, but it was, it got, like the concepts were not hard to grasp, and we had a lot of time on our hands to mess with them. So I got dissatisfied with just having the two rooms. So I took Sam and Max's office and I painted up a new version of it that was the office next door, Flip Paper's office, and put a bunch of bullet holes in the walls there and made it so you could walk there. And then I went walking around the building and down to where the artists lived, and I asked them if they had any art that I could use. So I wound up cobbling together this test project that was like Sam and Max's office, and then there was a stairway that went downstairs, and there were a bunch of rooms from Maniac Mansion down there. They were all stuck together. And then there was a post on the staircase, which if you touched it, it would teleport you up to a starship. Because somebody was making a spaceship game. And then I put a puzzle into it where you go up to that starship and a fly gets caught in the transporter with you. It's like the movie The Fly. And so Max turns into a half fly, half Max. He's got this giant fly head, and you're walking around with him like that, and then you have to chase this fly back into the teleporter in order to fix him. A little like Scum action puzzle, which is a little bit of a stretch for the Scum system, which is mostly designed to do kind of puppet theater. Have this guy here, walk him over there, have him say this line. It makes it very easy to do any of that stuff. But if you actually want to drive cars around or do anything with action, then it's quite different. So while this was going on, they were sort of paying attention to what we were doing, I guess. How capable were we with different things? How funny were we? So at some point, Ron Gilbert came in, he took Tim Schafer and I aside and said, look, I'm making this game about pirates, and I want you guys to work on it with me. What do you say? And we said, sure. What else were we going to say? Of course we said yes. And that's how I wound up on Monkey, which is my first real game. Wow.
So, obviously,
action. That's what it was. The arcade game was.
The Indiana Jones one.
Yeah, not the adventure game. It was called Indie Action, and it was just a little.
Yeah, I don't think I ever played the action game.
Yeah, it's not really the same kind of thing.
So at that point, then you're obviously you start working on Monkey Island.
Yeah. So
the opening credits say written and programmed by Dave Grossman, Ron Gilbert, and Tim Schafer.
Yeah.
So can you expand on that a bit, as in how much of your time was kind of split between programming and then writing the story and the dialogue?
Well, the day looked like this. We would usually spend one or two sort of maybe hour-long sessions together, all three of us, and maybe with some extra visitors too, brainstorming about puzzle structure mostly, which is all wrapped up in story and story structure. All the puzzles are sort of about people and their weird needs and that kind of thing. And then we would go off and have responsibilities, and Tim and I were mostly doing we were sort of responsible for making a scene come to life, right? So it would be like, all right, you're going to do the scene with these circus guys. And so part of that was, somebody would draw the art, but we would have to do some like stage direction, which is like, okay, these guys are going to stand over here, and then when you talk to them, they're going to walk over here. If anybody does any animations like during the conversation, we have to sort of say how and when that's going to happen. And so the programming part was all kind of high level stuff like that. It wasn't like, oh, I'm in C and I'm working on the engine. We didn't do any of that. It was all kind of scripting the game itself and the scenes that were happening in it. And that meant that people had to have things to say while they were walking around and in support of the puzzles and stuff. And so a lot of our time was spent coming up with that stuff. So I remember a time very early on in the development of the game where it was just starting to sort of feeling out what the game was actually going to be. And Tim was over on one side of the room, and he was writing the ship salesman scene in the puzzle where you got to haggle with Stan, the ship guy. And I was on the other side of the room writing the circus scene with the two guys who convinced you to get in the cannon. And people kept coming in and just kind of looking over our shoulders and kind of laughing and stuff. And I think that was when I really started to understand what it was we were making.
Right. So it's kind of a bit of working together and then a bit of doing your own thing and kind of bouncing off each other.
Yeah, that seemed to be a good dynamic for all of us. It's nice. You want to exchange ideas and sort of come up with stuff, but then you need a little alone time. But like I did some of my best thinking, A, in the shower, and B, in the car on the way to the office, because it was an hour drive from my apartment, and I didn't have anything else to think about except for who's that guy who's going too slow in front of me. So I would often get to the office with a pitch for some puzzle that we were stuck on. We would run upstairs and be like, guys, what do you think about this?
So it seemed quite a free environment at Lucasfilm in general back then. Did you feel like you had a lot of freedom while you guys were developing the game?
I did, and I didn't realize how much freedom we had until later when I had to have other jobs. I basically got spoiled for the rest of my life by that experience. I don't know. There was not a lot of pressure, or at least it certainly didn't trickle down to me to make something that was especially like commercially viable. We weren't responsible for keeping the company afloat. We were a tiny division of a great big media empire that had lots of movie money and special effects money and sound production money coming in. And it wasn't until a few years in that anybody even suggested that we should make a profit. So I think actually the division was initially funded by a grant from Atari. Somebody gave George $1 million and said, just make games. We want to make this be a thing. So why don't you make some games? So yeah, it just felt like we were playing, and we did work hard. I mean, certainly there was always a big pressure to get things done by September so you could sell them as Christmas presents.
Right.
And, back in the days when you had to put an actual object on the shelf to sell a game, and it was important to get it into the stores. So we were working weekends and overtime and stuff, but I don't remember anybody specifically saying you need to do this. It was more, we were all 20-something and we were really into what we were doing. And the office was a lot nicer than my apartment, so I loved being there. I loved working on this stuff. Just did it all the time. Where was I going with this? What was the? Oh yeah. Right. Yeah, and I mean the other part of it was, at least for the first year, we were up on that ranch, and it's just like it's crazy to think of that as a workplace. My office was in this building called the Stable House, which was not an old stable house, but it was designed as though it had been one. This is like movie set making. George wanted to have a place for people to work where it felt like it had a history that it really didn't have. And so there are all these, it's like out in the rolling hills, and the buildings are all designed so that you can't see them from each other. So you always feel like you're sort of out in the wilderness, some idyllic place. And you could, like, at lunch, go hiking around the property and get up on a hill or something. And they had a world-class chef in there because there wasn't any. The nearest restaurant was probably 20 or 30-minute drive from there, so it was unreasonable to ask people to go anywhere. So we provided a lot of good food on site. And I would always, kind of double up on my lunch and save some for dinner and good stuff. And there was, at any time you might walk out of the office and you might see Steve Priscilla practicing with his bullwhip, which he had gotten because his excuse was, I need to know how this works so I can animate it for the Indiana Jones game, which we already finished by the time I got there, but I kept the bullwhip around. And it was this enormous, like, handcrafted leather 20-foot long thing, and he would be out there like whipping the tops off of weeds with it. And then inevitably some sucker would come up and be like, "Oh, can I try that?" And they kind of whip themselves in the head accidentally. So it was fun.
Definitely a unique environment to be making games, I think.
Yeah, and sort of on purpose. And part of the idea was, let's just get some creative people and kind of throw them into a barn together and see what happens.
So going back to kind of, I did have a couple of questions sort of around working around the SCUM interface, which you've pretty much answered. So how would you actually approach designing a puzzle? Like, how does that start?
Typically we would do it what you might think of as backwards, which is think of the goal first and then think of how you would achieve the goal. And that would start with story. So usual approach since then, which I guess I learned on the game, is to sort of take the overall idea for the story and sort of break it down into a few acts. And each act has some kind of a goal that the character is trying to achieve that's setting at the end of it. And then break down that goal into some sub-goals that sort of make sense. And then take each one of those and break it down into some actions that you would take in order to achieve them. And then all the time you're trying to fill in a couple of boxes of each thing. Like each action that you take should be hopefully something that makes you feel a little bit clever and is sort of a leap of like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do this. So it's fun in some other way. And there's definitely a space between telling people exactly what to do and leaving them lost. You have to kind of aim in the middle somewhere where you've got some information, but maybe not quite enough. And the more you poke at it, the more you learn. Then finally you get to a point where you're like, I know what I'm going to do. Bridge this gap. It was always important that the puzzle, that it makes sense, and we didn't always do this as best we could, that it made sense that this was the only way that you could solve this puzzle. Like we were forever taking ladders out of the background art because it's like, oh, that's if there's one of those around, then there's another way for you to do this and this and this. It really needs to sort of feel like in the place that I am in and with the materials at hand, that I really need to do this weird thing that you're making me do, as opposed to just finding a rock and breaking something open with it. Is that a reasonable answer to your question? Have I gone off the
No. Perfectly reasonable.
There's a book I did an interview once, from Blue Sky to Green Light, and I compared designing puzzles to building bridges over a stream, where you put the beginning of the bridge on one side, and you put the end of the bridge on the other side. You let the player build the middle.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, it makes sense starting with the outcome that you want to achieve, really, doesn't it? And kind of working
Yeah,
out the
I've
middle.
run across a lot of people who do it the other way, where it's like, what's a fun thing that you could do, and then where would that lead you? And those games seem to be more random and messier. You're just kind of doing a bunch of fun stuff, but not with any point of goal. Whereas if you start at the end and you know where you're going, then the drama works better. You're always being drawn towards something. It all feels like it has a purpose, like it's in pursuit of something.
So I had a question about Sierra Adventure Games. I know you said earlier that you played Leisure Suit Larry. So was there anything about Sierra's games? Because I know they were kind of big rivals of Lucasfilm at the time in the adventure game market. Were there any aspects of their games that you wanted to avoid when you guys were developing Monkey Island?
Yeah, frustration was the one big thing, actually, and that's still a thing for me. Like I don't like to be frustrated. So those games are fun because they do, they tickle those nerves of I'm going to try and find clever solutions to things, and it's also really fun to watch the character die a lot. Like funny fails are big in Sierra games. I found, for my personal taste, that was always overdone. That the deaths were too arbitrary. You couldn't see them coming, and it would have felt like in Lucasfilm's Indiana Jones game, the one that was built before I got there. You could die, but it always felt like you earned it. You lost a fight or something. There were reasons why you were dying. Whereas in a Sierra game, you would just sort of accidentally click too far on the art, and you would walk into traffic and be run over by a taxi cab. That could be actually difficult to avoid, and it kind of breaks the fantasy for me if I'm supposed to be like a normal human being, and yet it's difficult for me to not walk into traffic and be run over by a taxi. Like, I think it was the bow game or something. It kept happening to me, and it's just so frustrating. Come on, I want to get on with the gaming story. So that was sort of I think the big philosophical difference between us, and we would go out of our way to ensure that we didn't break the fantasy, that we never killed you off, that you might get stuck on something for a while, hopefully not for too long. But we would always leave you in fantasy and always leave you going forward rather than having to ever sort of backtrack on something. And there is that scene in The Secret of Monkey Island, I put it in actually, where you fall off the cliff and the cliff crumbles beneath you. Like, the way that happened was I got the background art for that scene. I think Mike Ebert was the one who drew that one, and there was just like a line over at the edge of the piece of rock that you were standing on, and it just looked like a crack, like it was supposed to break. And my first thought was, did I miss a meeting, and is there a puzzle about this that I don't know about? So I asked around, oh no, that's just to make it look interesting, it's just a surface feature. So I was like, well, all right. So I just, that night, I painted a different version of it where the thing had broken off, and I made the piece so that I could animate it dropping down and stepping out there and put in this whole elaborate thing where the cliff crumbles, but we just make the excuse that there's a rubber tree down there that you bounce off of and you survive, but not before seeing the parody of the Sierra death message come up. It comes up and says, "Oh, sorry you died. Hope you saved the game, etc., etc." No, haha. This isn't that kind of game. This is a Lucasfilm game. So we got your back. And I think it was always we wanted people to feel comfortably like we did have their back, and we wouldn't let anything bad happen to them. And so they should explore. Right? You don't want to have a game that's about exploration where the exploration feels too dangerous.
I love that rubber tree joke. I think it's one of the best jokes in the game.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome.
I love that we just had the freedom to do stuff like that too. They didn't have to ask anybody, just put that in, and I mean, they might have maybe take it out, but they didn't.
So yeah, I mean, I was 9 when Monkey Island came out, and I think that's a big reason why I sort of gravitated towards Lucasfilm Adventures rather than Sierra, because it was just too frustrating for me at that age. I think those aspects. So the 3 trials. So the start of the game, obviously, you kind of go on this 3 trials, and it does help to make it feel slightly less linear and sort of more open world. Like you have the freedom to, go out and learn these things and explore. So was that a conscious intention to kind of open it up a bit?
Yeah, it might have happened a little too soon in that particular game. Nowadays, I think, have a little sort of get to know you part that's a little more linear, and then open it up. But certainly, for a variety of reasons, I think that's a very important thing to do. One is there is a particular kind of tension, which is grown by having a lot of things to think about. It's like you've got a checklist in your head of all the stuff you're trying to accomplish, and when that gets big, it does feel tense. Not in a scary way, but in a dramatic way. And that's when you're making a game which is paced entirely by the player, like it's just waiting for them to accomplish things. That's one of the few ways that you can generate tension, right? Sort of piling up some responsibilities on them. Another thing is there are boundaries to how open and how linear it is good to make a game. So if you have a game where you literally there's just one thing to do at a time, and you're always sort of being given instructions as to what that is, it feels very constrained. It feels like you're being told what to do, and people don't much like being told what to do. But also people don't like to be lost, and if you sort of start the game and open every possibility at the beginning, then there's too much for them to think about, and they just don't know what to do first or second or whatever, and so they just feel completely lost. So it's good to always kind of aim in the middle of there somewhere where the player has a few things that they can be thinking about, not too many, so that they can just sort of comfortably go along and figure stuff out and experience the story and feel neither lost nor over-directed.
So do you have, from The Secret of Monkey Island, do you have like a favourite scene or puzzle or bit of dialogue or anything? I know you just mentioned that rubber tree, which may be the answer, but
no, that's not it. These are answers that change over time. I actually played the game, probably less than a year ago with my kid who's 6 now, and it was a little beyond him to some degree, but the stuff that I like best now are the things that aren't puzzles, but that sort of use the standard interface to do other stuff. So there's the insult sword fighting, which is good, but also around that you have to. The puzzle where you have to follow the shopkeeper out into the forest to find the sword master, and I thought that was a clever bit of subterfuge. And there's one puzzle where you have to like the grog is eating through your mugs, and you have to keep transferring it from mug to mug as you get there. And I like those, I think, just because they're sort of breaking the what we have come to think of as the standard mode of adventure game puzzle, which is just use this on that and see the reward.
You just reminded me of something that I haven't written down to ask you, but I will ask you. With the insult sword fights, because I spoke to Orson Scott Card over email, and he said that he never actually played the game. He didn't know if his it was all his insults in the end or not? Do you know the answer to that? Because I know he's credited with doing the insult.
I do, and it wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, so I seem to recall that. I mean, we were working on the game, and we just sort of got this information that Orson Scott Card was writing some insults and comebacks for us. We were like, okay, and I think the story was that Scott needed health insurance or something, and so this was just a way to kind of have him be able to do something.
Yeah.
And possibly it was a PR thing. I never know about that. But the instructions we got were, just take these, and if you can use them, and if they don't work for you, then don't worry about it, and just make up some more stuff. And so, because he didn't really have all the context for what these were going to need to do, which is, they needed to be sort of matched pairs of insult and comeback that needed to be distinct from one another, and that also we're going to need to serve double duty when you got to the Swordmaster.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to, you're going to have to use all your comebacks again in another context. That's a very narrow box that he was not given. And so, we just got a kind of a list of interesting insults. And so what wound up happening was that Tim and I crafted almost all of that, but some of the insults are still in there. And I think mostly with different comebacks. So, Scott's fingers are still in there somewhere, but it was mostly us who did the.
Okay, well, thanks for clearing that up.
That was one of the most difficult things we had to do. I mean, that's not easy to do, and not easy to translate.
Yeah, because I mean, I think even at a young age, I always used to think that was really clever when you got to Swordmaster, and then the comebacks have another use, and it's like, wow. Yeah. And that must have been tricky.
And there you go. That is another favorite aspect of my game. That particular moment of realization. Oh, I can use these things.
So you're saying there's kind of a fine line with puzzles, as you don't want to make it too easy and you don't want people to be frustrated. So can you remember anything that kind of went too far either way and had to be removed or kind of toned down?
Oh goodness. Well, no, I'm not sure that I can remember anything that was removed at all. But usually when, like, there's a part where we're pretty far along, we've kind of got the game put together, and you can play it from beginning to end, and we have what is called the pizza orgy, famously. And this has been spoken of in many other contexts, but we would just get people's friends and family in one evening after hours and feed them pizza and soda and have them play the game. We would walk around and watch them. And one thing was we would watch to see where they laughed and where they didn't, which was kind of important. If the jokes weren't working, then we would cut them. But the far more important thing that we would watch is where did they get stuck. That allowed us to figure out, like, oh, okay, some of these puzzles are kind of unfair, but usually they were unfair because we had left something out. We had some important piece of information was not coming across. And so rather than cutting the puzzle, we would just fix it. We would make the information available that you needed in order to be able to solve the puzzle, and put it into the mouth of some character or a look at on some object, and just make the adjustments so that the puzzle worked previously. Now, obviously, there are some instances where we didn't do that effectively. The one that comes to mind is not from Monkey; it's from Monkey 2. It's that damn monkey wrench puzzle, where you hypnotize the monkey to turn him into a monkey wrench, and that's wrong on several levels, and is usually the example that I reach for first when I'm explaining what not to do with puzzles. Okay, definitely, I think we broke all the rules with that.
Yeah, I mean,
and yet it didn't get cut. It's still in the game.
I think, I mean, veering off topic very slightly to one of my other all-time favorite games, Day of the Tentacle, I think that does that perfectly. You know, everything is, solvable in that perfect way. So still tricky, but it's like, I think that sort of nailed the perfect balance.
Well, thank you. We certainly tried. There is the one thing that people complain about from that game is the puzzle where you got to wash the carriage to make it rain.
Yeah.
But there are some mild hints in there for that, to be fair. We played that one a couple of years ago too with Tim when they were going to do the remaster of it, and so he and I sat down and played through the entire thing actually. And that was one where he was like, people complain about this, but look right there, that's a hint for it, and this over here, that's a hint for it. So there's a few.
I think I watched that actually.
Yeah. Oh, all 3 hours?
Yeah. Of course.
I just assumed that that was a common knowledge in every household that as soon as you washed your car, it would rain. But apparently, no, that was just my house.
You know what? Yeah, I mean, I think when I go back and play it, that's the one that it takes me a couple of minutes to remember. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to wash the carriage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really it's only fair in that game because the puzzles are cartoons, just like the art is. There are quite a few things, like you paint the stripe on the cat to make it be a skunk. Cartoony actions are required of you. You have to think like a cartoon character. That's all that game.
True.
I don't think we could have gotten away with putting that into Monkey Island.
So, Secret of Monkey Island, as with many of the other Lucasfilm adventures, is listed with references to Star Wars, Loom, Indiana Jones. So, firstly, did you have any favorite references from the game? And secondly, were there any kind of no-go areas in terms of what you could and couldn't reference?
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite reference just because there are constantly so many in there. I always like the recurring Loom seagull that we just, and that was mainly just because we're always starved for art. We needed something. Oh, let's put a seagull in. We can get that for free. We already drew the seagull. Yeah, we'll just take the Loom seagull. So it's fun that appears in virtually everything. Finding the secret maxes that are drawn into the background art, always one somewhere. As far as no-go areas, there was always a family-friendly aspect to everything. So I think anything that was sort of, overly violent or sexual in nature wouldn't make the cut. We just sort of learned not to do that stuff. No cursing or anything like that. What I would say now, it is that the things that are the sort of specific timely references to something that was in the news like that year, mostly you probably wouldn't even notice anymore. But the things that are sort of more general references to a certain type of character last longer. Like Stan the ship salesman is a good example. He's loosely based on a real guy, right? Cal Worthington. His name is a used car salesman. But he was the used car salesman who was on TV a lot in Southern California, where I grew up. And people in Northern California or Oregon, which is where I grew up, didn't know about him. And Tim wrote that scene, never having seen, I think, a Cal Worthington commercial. But he still kind of hits the mark because there's something sort of universal about that kind of hand-wavy, noisy guy who's trying to sell you a car. That goes beyond the specific reference that I think at the time everybody in LA got and no one else did.
Mm. So, as I understand it, the game wasn't an immediate success. Slightly more successful over in Europe here, but obviously gained this huge cult status since then. So did you see it coming at all? And at what point did you realize that the game's popularity had gained this traction?
Oh, wow. I'm not sure. Success is definable on very varying kinds of terms. Like, we got recognition like at the Game Developers Conference and stuff. Like other game developers liked it, knew that. And we all liked it. I think we knew that we had made something good. Just in terms of actual monetary sales, Lucasfilm never did that great in the U.S. market. We were certainly overshadowed significantly by Sierra domestically, but we did have a lot of European fans, and when we released over there, that was like a significant portion of the income we got from any particular game was Europe. Maybe you guys have better taste where they're possibly. And there's no particular moment where I was like, oh, hey, this is a success. This is a failure. I guess I always felt like it was a success, just because it came out, which is, I didn't realize even how unusual that could be until much later in my career. Everything we did actually released. It came out and people played it, and we got fan letters, and the people seemed to like it, and I didn't have a lot of insight or interest into what were the financials of how much did we spend on this and how much were we making. That was somebody else's job. So I just didn't care. All I knew was that we had made something that was fun, and various people were telling me that it was fun. So in that instance, I knew right away that it was a success. And the fact that people still talk about it, though, is that continues to amaze me on a daily basis. Like, so many other things have come out in the years since, and yeah, lots of them get talked about. The fact that we made something that was not just good and fun, but that actually continues to be good and fun many years after its release is not something that I understood at the time, nor would I know how to plan for
that. I do find it interesting, because it was only really when sort of doing a lot of research in the past couple of months that I realized it wasn't that the huge seller, because back in England, back then, lusos was huge from my perspective. Everyone loved these games, and if I tell my friends I'm speaking to you or Ron, everyone's kind of excited, and it's just a big thing here. It means a lot to a lot of people.
Well, at the time, if you talk about it in terms of just actual numbers, then nothing did very good. But the industry was very small then. There were not a lot of people who played computer games or had computers in their homes or any of that stuff, and it didn't really start to become the gigantic media behemoth industry that it is until at least, I would say, 1993, the release of Doom kind of started to kick things off, where lots of kids just saw that and oh my god, gotta have that, and that combined with computers are cheaper and everybody's getting one, and now everybody has a CD drive. And, explode. But
I guess the whole scene here was different in 1990 anyway, because we obviously had a huge 8-bit and then 16-bit microcomputer scene here, whereas from what I understand in the States, the video game industry was very different during the 80s, so maybe that kind of helped. A lot of people had things like Amigas in their house back then, and Commodores. So I think we're nearing the end of my questions. So the last question I had on my list was, you obviously got to return to the Monkey Island franchise when you were at Telltale. Would you be interested in working on Monkey Island 3A should the possibility ever arise?
Maybe. I think most people don't know about that Telltale game. is that I didn't want to do it. The bosses came to me and said, "So we're going to do Monkey Island." And I was like, "Oh, really?" It was just kind of a weird situation because there was a lot of hush hush around it to the point where I couldn't even call Ron or Tim to talk to them about it for a while. And eventually they did that. Once I guess all the deals were perfectly well in place and everything was signed and stuff, they let me call Ron and try and convince him to work on it, which he could barely do. We got him to come out for a week. But I was just kind of terrified of the whole prospect of it, of doing it independent of either of those guys, and just of living up to expectations, I guess. And I went into it with this kind of fear on my back, and nevertheless, I'm pretty pleased with what we came out with. It's kind of weird and silly, but in a way, it's a more grown up set of games than the earlier ones that I had the opportunity to work on. And I thought at that time, like, this is interesting. This is a game that is made by 40-year-old people with kids, as opposed to 20-year-old people, kind of poking each other in the ribs a lot. Mm-hmm. And what I have said since then is I'm interested in what would happen if we were all like 60 and we did it again. Mm-hmm. Well, I was the likelihood of it.
Yeah,
but I think I would turn up for it.
Sorry, you think you would?
I think I would do it. I think that those fears are fears that I no longer have. So I'd be more into the let's have some fun.
Well, we live in hope that it will one day happen, but obviously the current situation is who knows.
Yeah, I don't know what would be.
Yeah, I think that's my main questions I had. I'm conscious of taking up too much of your time, Dave. But
yeah, right. I am supposed to be working on stuff and everything.
But yeah, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. It's a nice, good conversation.
And I'll.
Good luck with your you said you talked to Ron already?
I did, yeah. I talked to Ron. Steve Purcell said he'd kind of chat to me over email.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Mark Ferrari's going to talk to me later this month on Skype, I think.
Oh, cool.
And then, well, I haven't heard back from Tim yet, but I'm crossing my fingers.
Yeah. Tim's probably the hardest one to get a hold of. He's got people,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
control his media schedule.
We'll see.
I mean, talk to everybody else, and then he'll come.
Yeah, will do.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully it should be up in October anyway for the quote, 30th anniversary or whenever that actually is.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
All right. Cheers.